Hey there, welcome back. This is Atul from team K21Academy, and this is part 3 of our setting up a Kubernetes cluster on AWS, which is a managed Kubernetes, which is EKS. So in the previous lesson, we configured a master node, or we call control plane. Now I'm going to create a machine that will act as a client from where I'm going to run all my commands like Kubectl or EKSCTL to later when I'm creating pods, services, application deployment, all of that I'm going to do it from this machine. Also, I'm going to have another video which will talk about how to do it from a command line interface, how to create a cluster using command line. That time also I'm going to use this machine. So this machine we're going to retain it so that in future if we need to create any clusters quickly, I can use that machine, but will shut down after we use. So what we're going to do in this machine is there are main level, high level, we create a Linux machine. We're going to create an image type of AWS Linux, which I'll show you what I mean. Then actually you need to install and configure AWS CLI. So AWS CLI automatically comes by default on when you create a machine of type or EC2 of type AWS image. That comes automatically with AWS CLI. If you're having a Ubuntu or Red Hat type, then you better install AWS CLI for that. I'll put the steps as well here. Then we configure AWS CLI, which means we collect our details and give that details for the AWS CLI that we have configured that can talk to my AWS account. This Linux machine can talk to the AWS machine. And then finally, I'll set up a Kubectl or kubectl configuration. By default, this machine also has EKSCTL, so I don't need to do anything EKSCTL point of view. The Kubectl will also be there. I just need to set it up, or the new version of Kubectl. I'll explain that as well in a minute. So let's go straight on here. Again, you should have a basic understanding of EC2. Again, if you're not, that's what I'm going to cover here. So I'm going to go to the EC2 and create a machine on. So this is the cluster that I've already created AWS account, where I've created already my EKS. So now I go onto this here search bar and type EC2, and EC2 stands for my virtual machines or Elastic Compute Cloud. Click on this link here, select instances here, and by default you should not have any instances. If you already have instance, that's not totally fine. We'll create a new instance here. So click on instances. You can click on here and say launch instance, or when I've clicked on instances, I already had an instance which I stopped, so I'm going to create it altogether different instance here now. I'll say launch instance from here, and I'll give a instance name. So I'll probably name of this EKS instance or client machine. So I'll say EKS client, and maybe I'll put K21 or something, whatever name you want to give it. And then this is where you select images. Now this is what I was talking about Amazon Linux. If you select AWS Linux, that comes by default with my AWS CLI, also tools like EKSCTL, also tools like other software as well. So we'll select this. You can select other Red Hat or Ubuntu, but then you will need additional setup. So save of my time, AWS CLI. I'm going to select an image which is under free tier eligible, which is a T2 micro, if I'm not wrong here. 1 second, let's see. So this is a small image which we'll see later here. It's a 64-bit processor, and then it's a T2 micro. It's eligible for free tier. I don't know to pay for it's coming from a free account, so I'll create a free account. Now this is where key pair login. If I'm using tools like Putty or SSH client, I'll need a key, private key, public key. That's what I need to create here. So I'll say create a new key pair, and I give a pair name and say EKS client. So I'll say EKS client key pair, and I've typed. Now PEM file is if I'm connecting through a Linux machine or from a Linux machine like Mac or Linux, then I'll use PEM file. Because now in future I have a Windows machine laptop from which I'm connected to this Linux machine, I'll be using PPK file. You can change them. You have a tool called Protigen that can change those. Click on create key pair. It will download the key pair for my machine. In my machine, if I'm using the tool later, that's where I'll use this, or if I need Putty, that's when I'll need these keys. Now this machine will be created inside a VPC. We saw VPC in the previous part, which is a network that will be created, a security group basically, which is a firewall. And I'm saying because I'm going to connect from my internet from my laptop to this machine, that means I'm saying allow from anywhere 0.0.0.0. It can, so that means this machine can be connected from anywhere which I want, and allow SSH connection, which is my port 22 number. It's creating storage of 8 gig of type storage, and that's pretty much all I need is, and I say launch instance. It'll take probably 4-5 minutes for this launch instance to connect, or this instance to be connected. So I've created a machine. Now I need to install the AWS CLI. As I said, this AWS CLI is already there on this machine of image, so I don't need to worry about. Otherwise, if you don't have a AWS, I'll show you what I mean by, you just type on connect to this machine and say AWS and -- version, you will be able to connect it. If you don't have, for some reason, if you're using Ubuntu type machine or a Red Hat Linux, then you will install the client using this method. Once this client is done, then I need to create or configure this AWS CLI in configuration, which means this should be user ID and password that will connect from my laptop, from this machine, which I've just created, to my AWS account. So that we do it via AWS IAM access key. So I'm going to go to the right hand side here at security credentials and create a key. So while the machine creation is in progress, if I go on view all instances, so it's saying running, but it's still initializing. So while this initialization is done, I'll create a key value, I'll create a key and password, or a user ID, user keys to connect. So this is where I'll say, click on here and say security credentials. Collect on security credentials. Now this is where by default you will have a blank already access key. I already, as I said to you earlier, I already had a machine. On that machine I use this key. I can reuse this key, but in your case, if you've never created a key, you will not have anything like that. So I'm going to say I can create a second key. So say create access key. Now this is a risky method of doing, because I'm doing it at root level. Ideally I should have created a user that has a limited access on, or a write or roles access. Because this is a demo environment, I wanted to make it quick, simple. So we'll create a root user, a key against a root user. So I say I understand the risk and say create access key. Now I need to make a note of this key and secret key. Now I'm going to delete this machine soon after. So I'll show the key here right now, which is not the right thing to do. But then I'm going to delete this key after that. So even if you try to work, it will not work here. So I'll say show, make a note of this key, these two, and we'll need that when I'm configuring my EKS class or like the AWS CLI. So say done. This is all I need, a key and access key. I go back to my EC2, and once I have this, I'm ready to configure the commands here. So I click on instance here, which is running. So if you notice here, it's saying 2 of 2 security check passed. Basically it is created the instance and configured. So all I'm ready to connect to this machine. So click on this instance ID here, and then you click on this connect. Now again, I don't want to do and create or use SSH client like PuTTY or SSH client or anything. AWS gives me an option to connect from the browser itself. So that's what I'm going to feature. That's the feature I'm going to use. This is my public IP, and this is the user ID by default it creates. For EC2 machines, it's created or my AWS type EC2, it creates a user called EC2-user. So it's going to connect using using the key which is already stored locally on this browser here, or this account here. So I'll simply say connect. It'll open up a new browser. So I don't even need those keys that are downloaded. Those keys are required only if I want to connect through PuTTY or SSH client. So it's now connecting. And now if you look at AWS, which is basically I have the AWS -- version, which means AWS is already installed in here. It's AWS CLI version 1.18 is already there. Now let's see if I do have EKSCTL as well, EKSCTL. So EKSCTL is not, it doesn't looks like it's there. Okay, and similarly kubectl, or at least if I do sudo EKSCTL, it's not there. And similarly kubectl is probably, let's see if kubectl is there, kubectl, it's not there as well. So we'll install these two tools as well. But before that, we need to configure the AWS CLI, this configuration. So currently the AWS CLI is installed, but it doesn't know on which account to connect, which means I want to connect to the same machine. Even though the virtual machine is on the same account, this virtual machine doesn't know on which AWS account I need to connect, and that's what I need to give it right now here. So the command to configure or integrate your AWS is, I'll say AWS and space and then configure. So say AWS and configure. Now by default, it will store this configuration in a config file securely. But if you want, if let's suppose you make some mistakes or some configuration settings change, you can reconfigure it by running this command. So first it's asking my access key ID, and then the key ID that I created earlier, which is this key ID here. Again, I'll delete this key, so don't try it out on your to see if you can connect. No, I'll be deleting this key after I'm done with this demo. So hit enter, and now it's saying default region. So what happens is you can leave it to blank, but let's suppose I'm running any command in future AWS commands, CLI, and if I don't specify a region, it will pick up that default region. If I specify the region in the command line, it will pick up that region. So I already have a region. It's always good to pick that region. I'm working on EU-West-2. So I'll say EU-West-2. And then output format. So if I'm running some command and when the output comes in what format, it's going to give me that output. So it's always good to put JSON. JSON is a format naming like output format. JavaScript object notation JSON. So I've configured my AWS CLI. I should be able to run some commands like AWS, some commands here, and that should be able to do now all the admin tasks on this particular my account. It knows that using the key and secret key ID and secret key ID and access key, it knows that hey, I need to connect to this instance, etc. So the basically AWS command line. So if you go further down, now next is I need to access this my Kubectl, basically kube configuration. So first I need to identify the region. I've just saw that a region, which is my region is, if I want to find out the region, you drop down here and say EU-West-2, wherever your EKS is configured. We created under London, so EU-West-2. So I'll make a note of this here and say EU-West-2. And then I'll need one more detail. So in order to check my cluster status, which is saying AWS and then space and then EKS and then space dash region, I've already identified the region, and then describe dash cluster and name of the cluster. So this is what I need, my name of the cluster. I earlier said in the previous part that hey, in order to create the cluster, I need to, I'll use that cluster name later. So if you forgot, we go and search here EKS and look at the cluster name from here. So this is my cluster name here. This is my cluster name. So I'll save this one as well, cluster name. And if I go here, this is the command I need to run. I need to check the cluster status. If I'm able to run this command, that means my AWS CLI is configured properly. So the command is EKS region. I'll change it. In my case, it's EU-West-2. And then my cluster name is K21Academy, K21Academy01, that looks. And then query, I'm saying cluster.status. And we'll take this, run it on this command line here and paste it. Say AWS EKS this command. So it's saying is active. My cluster is active right now, which I can see it here as well, saying status is active. So we are good that it can connect to the instance. Next is I need to configure the Kubectl, basically Kubernetes control file. I need to configure that. That means I need to, now this controller doesn't know, or this machine doesn't know where is my Kubernetes cluster details is, and that's what we are doing. I'm saying AWS EKS region is whatever my region, and I'm saying update config and name of the cluster. Now what this command does is it's going to connect to whatever my cloud account based on my AWS CLI I already configured. It'll connect to this region. Inside that it'll connect to this cluster name, and then download the configuration file and then store it under user's home directory in a folder called .kube inside that config file. So I'll show you that as well. So that's how in future then I'm going to run the commands of Kubernetes, then it knows which Kubernetes cluster to connect to. So if you look here, and first I need to change the region. So in my case, region is EU-West-2, and then kube config name is correct. Name is same as this. So let's go back to the browser here. And before I go further here, ls-a, if you notice here, I have my .aws file folder. So AWS folder is my AWS configuration, where my AWS configuration was. When I configured AWS CLI, this is where my details credentials are stored, as I said, on this file cat credentials, it's an encrypted file. It's saying, oh, not encrypted, my access key and keys are stored here. So be careful with these keys. Okay. And if I look at config, cat config, and it's saying this is the configuration. I said that output I wanted JSON and region is this default region. So that's what we configured earlier. So if I come out of this here, this is what I was, ls-a. Again, if you're watching this as a part of my program, make sure that if you're new to Linux, there is a bonus called Linux for Beginners, which we cover all these commands like basic commands, VI, how do you use this editor, and how do you do these files, the common commands that we are using. So make sure you ask in the group. Now, command I need to run is this command, and if I hit paste, hit enter, if you look at it, say added a new context, ARN AWS resource name, and this is the name it has added, which means it's in west region. This is some number, and then cluster, this is the name of the cluster to this conf file, which means it has created now a new file, a new folder called .cube, cd.cube, which is my Kubernetes. Inside that, it has created a config file. So if I cat this config file, and if you notice that cat, what it's saying is that my cluster is, it's a API version v1. The cluster, this is my cluster, this is my SSL certificate. So using this certificate as an authentication mechanism to connect to my cluster. My cluster location is here. This is my number or name. So this is under AWS. It's EKS. It's an EU West 2, which is London region. And this is my control plane master node. This is the name and other users. So basically, this is the user and name, etc. And then other points as well here, where exactly this cluster is, or other details about this cluster. So if someone asks you in the interview, how does this client connects to the Kubernetes cluster, this is how it connects. This is how this config file is there. It picks up this config file. So ls-a, with under .cube, there's a config folder. So we have successfully now actually extracted the configuration. Now I need to see whether I can run these commands or not. So if I say kubectl, now again, remember I've not installed the kubectl, so it has not found the kubectl. So I have to install the kubectl and EKSCTL, those commands as well. Let me install and show it to you now here in this part. So while I was recording, I realized that the two steps were missed, which is, or the document was, I had to add two other documents or steps, which is install kubectl on Linux, and then second is install EKSCTL in Linux. So, and then we will be able to run this command, which is verify the output, which is validate the Kubernetes configuration, which is kubectl. And then later we might use EKSCTL as well. So to install Kubernetes, first of all, kubectl on this machine that we've created, this is the document link that I have opened or given here. So one thing you need to take care of is when you're installing kubectl also has a version, like you have EKS version or Kubernetes version. So make sure that your kubectl version matches with the Kubernetes version or EKS version. So EKS version we installed was 124. So I'm installing kubectl as well 124. So if I look at this document, which I've highlighted here, this document has this, which is installing kubectl. So kubectl is left hand side here. This is the document which I'm referring, and it has a kubectl on Mac, Linux or Windows. I'm interested in Mac, and this is the location for 124. If you want 124 Kubernetes, this is the kubectl for 124. If you have installed 123, then you use 123 kubectl. If you have 122, like that. So we have 124, so we are going to use this command here on Linux machine. So this is where kubectl was not found. So let me connect again here on this, and let's see the output of the command here. So first I'm going to say curl and put it one single until here into a one command and put it in notepad. It's always good practice to copy it from the notepad, and then you run the commands, one single command, because there might be some extra characters or junk characters in when you're copying from a PDF file or the Word file. So it's saying curl means like output. It's going to this URL and it's downloading. It's basically downloading the kubectl executable. Control Z, Control C, and if I go to this machine here, if I do pwd ls, we saw earlier ls-a -a, we already had .cube file and .aws we saw earlier. So if I do paste, it's going to download this kubectl file here. So it is downloading, and it is downloaded. Let's let it download. And if I do ls-a, and now I have this executable, which is, or this file kubectl ls-a or ls-al, this kubectl. Now this is important. Again, if you're Linux beginners in Linux, I have a training which talks about Linux for beginners. As a part of this program, you get permissions, how these permissions are done. So it's a read write, it needs execute permission basically, but it's only read write. We'll change that later part in later. So next is what I'm doing is I'm changing the permission now to executable. So just make a note of this executable command. So I say paste, I'm saying change on this, and I'm giving an execute permission. There are different ways to do the same thing. I would have done 7 read write execute, which means binary bit here. Again, I'm not going to go to Linux right now here. And if I do now ls-al, it's basically now it's executable. If you see kubectl, it's green. And if you have read write execute for user and groups members, right? So once this is done, then I'm going to, what I'm doing is I'm creating a bin directory in the user home and copying this kubectl into the kubectl in my user's home bin folder, and then I'm setting this home bin in my path of the user so that I can run this command from anywhere on this. So let's copy it here. So I'm saying I'm making this command directory here. So I'll explain you what I'm doing here. ls-a right now. If I run this command, so what is done is it created a folder called bin. Inside that bin, if you go inside the bin, inside that bin, it has copied this kubectl file. And then if I do echo $path, which means it has added this user home bin folder in path, so I can run this kubectl from anywhere. So if I type now kubectl, and it will tell me the output. So there's no, I can run this kubectl from anywhere now. This output is coming. So now I just need to see the kubectl version, and then -- short dash client. I think short is deprecating if I'm not wrong. Let's see. I think I saw this earlier. So I'll put it in Notepad. And here I have, go back to the command here, and I just wanted to see the output. Paste. So it's saying flag -- short has been deprecated, removed, which is fine. Output will become default. So I can run it without -- short as well. Same output. Okay. So it's saying client version. I just want a short version. So sorry for that. So it's saying that client version is this 1.24 client version of the kubectl, and customized version is version 4.5.4. So that basically installs my Kubernetes kubectl. But I also need EKSCTL. Some users prefer EKSCTL. It's always good to put EKSCTL. Again, the command to start or configure EKSCTL is given here. Let me show it onto the document as well. So kubectl EKS cluster, you can go here and run this command here. These are you can copy paste here. I've also added already onto this our guide. So this is first I need to copy. I'll put it into the Notepad. So I'm saying curl, I'm saying on a silent mode, it's not going to give prompt anything. Location is, this is the location of my EKSCTL, and then $username, $uname. Basically it's saying is that the operating system version, based on that, it's going to download, unzip it on the temp, and then bring it here. So it's multiple commands. It's a little bit more advanced Linux commands. So again, let me do cd ls-a, just want to make it clear. And ls-a, so there's nothing, kubectl is not there. If I paste it here and hit enter, it basically did silently something behind the scene. If you look at now here, it has extracted under temp folder EKSCTL. So let's go back to the temp folder, because if you see, I said output under temp, c temp. So if I do cd temp and ls-ltr, ltr is listing based on timestamp and reverse order, which means I only have 2 output here. This is the one which I got EKSCTL here. Next is I'm moving it to my executable folder, which is sudo, means I'm running it as a root user command, root super user. I'm moving this EKSCTL into user local bin. I'll say maybe go back to wherever I was and then paste it, this command. And if you do echo $path, user local bin is in my path, which means now if I run, if I go to user local bin, it has copied the file, and then EKSCTL is there. I can go anywhere and now run EKSCTL, which means now I can run these commands and say EKSCTL anywhere. This is one of the EKS options you have. You can create the resources, you can delete the resources, etc., deregister or deassociate. There are other options which we'll see in subsequent videos on this here in the program. So once this is done, then I just want to know the actual version of my Kubernetes version. So EKSCTL version, let's see EKSCTL version. First, it might be I'll get a higher version, I'm assuming. .128 is a version which is available now, which you have downloaded. Next, final part is I need to validate my Kubernetes configuration, and I can run various commands. I can do, let me first do Kubectl. Again, if a part of Kubernetes, we go in depth in all these commands. So Kubectl get nodes, which means how many nodes we have created. Right now I'm getting this command error, which I'll probably troubleshoot and say why I'm getting. It's authentication, this invalid version for nodes. Let's see SVC. Get SVC is list of services, and again I'm getting this. So let me troubleshoot this, why I'm getting this V alpha, and then I'll update you here. So I did some searching on this error message, which is client authentication K8s version 1 alpha 1, and I found a link which says the exact error, and which I have added into troubleshooting section. So if you hit any problem while performing these labs, make sure you look at the troubleshooting section, and we should be adding these. If anyone else hit issues, we'll be updating in this guide, and you can check this guide, or you can get this guide from the place wherever you're watching this. So this suggests that it could be because of the kubectl version 1.24 that had problem, and the suggestion was to downgrade it to 1.23.6. So I have added here steps to downgrade this kubectl version to 1.23.6 version. I've also mentioned here just because people will hit the problem. So I wanted at that place as well, because not a lot guys or the first time don't look at the issue directly on troubleshooting section. So first is I have already created this kubectl. I need to copy it to the backup. So the 24 version, I move it and then download 123 and then change the permission and then try it out. So you follow the guide and then moved into Kubectl and then to 1.24 and bin folder as well 124, and then followed exactly this command. Repeat it, just instead of 124 I have used 1.23.15. So if I now do here and say Kubectl, so I've downloaded the file, changed the permissions, and then copied to created the file. So I've created the folder again, and then checking the Kubernetes version now. Now remove the version part, and once I have this 1.23 version, and if I now run the command which is kubectl get svc and hit there, I'll get the output. So the issue is resolved now. And what is a SVC? There is a concept called service. That's what I've done, that it has already created a service of type. There are different type of services. Again, I'll put it, if you want to know more about services, we have covered it into the theory part, what is a service, but I'll link the description. So that pretty much completes my steps on creating a client onto the Kubernetes for Kubernetes cluster. So far, what we have done is we have started with creating, or I gave an overview about what we are going to cover in the part 1. Then in part 2, we installed a EKS master node or control plane using GUI method. And in this part 3, we have configured a Kubernetes. Then I configured AWS CLI, then set up Kubectl as well as, or set up the configuration file or bought the configuration from the cluster, installed Kubernetes or kubectl on Linux and EKSCTL as well. And then finally, when I encountered the error, I downgraded the kubectl version to the lower version 1.23, and that's when I was able to verify the Kubernetes commands. Now that's pretty much for this particular part. In the next part, I'm going to create a data plane using console. With that, if you have come so far, take a screenshot of this output and say you can run this kubectl get service, and it's showing me the service, and post it in our community in WhatsApp or Telegram group, so that I know that you are making progress, and it'll also tell me that or it'll also inspire others that to perform this lab. And with that, let's head on to the next part.